I never imagined betrayal could move so quietly, so gently, like warm fingers closing around a wrist while you're still laughing at a harmless joke. I never imagined it could wear the perfume of comfort and the voice of reassurance. Yet there I was, at 58, a man with reading glasses on a cord and a pill organizer that clicks like a tiny safe, thinking I'd found a latent life miracle and a woman who told me I had not gone invisible, that I still lit up a room, that my steadiness wasn't boring but rare. We met in the plainest place, the library on a Wednesday, the kind of afternoon where the light looks tired on the carpet. I was returning a book about pruning tomatoes because my backyard raised bed had become a jungle. She was asking the clerk where the biographies were, and when the clerk waved toward a sign, she turned to me and smiled like we were already sharing a secret. "Do you read about other people's lives because yours feels too quiet?" she asked. I said maybe, or because mine feels too loud. And we walked the stacks together, two strangers pretending we had always been good at this. She told me she liked stories about survivors, people who took a mess and made a home out of it. She laughed at the way I muttered the Dewey numbers under my breath. She tapped my elbow when I found the shelf like we'd just solved the puzzle on a game show. By the time we reached the checkout, my heart, which had been sleeping in a chair for a few years, had stood up and straightened its shirt. "Coffee?" she asked, like it was an ordinary question. And that is how extraordinary starts, with a thing that looks small enough to ignore. We sat near the window at the cafe across the street. She ordered red wine even though it was barely 3, said it helped her talk. I ordered coffee black because that's what old habits order when they're nervous. She asked about the ring tan on my finger. "Old marriage," I said. It ended like a TV show that forgot how to write itself. No villains, just reruns. She touched the rim of her glass and said, "People who refuse to give up on gentleness are my favorite kind of stubborn." I told her my name. She told me hers. And then she told me about growing up in apartments where the radiators hissed and the rent was always late, about a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who worked on excuses. She said she wanted a life that wasn't an emergency. I said I wanted a life where Sunday didn't feel like a hallway to Monday. We said we'd keep it simple. Simple turned into dinners, dinners into overnight, overnight into a toothbrush next to mine, then half a dresser, then the key. My house had been careful with me. It wore silence like a cardigan. Now it learned her laughter, her music. It learned the soft choreography of 2 mugs instead of 1. My dog, who has better judgment than host committees, approved her instantly, which I took as divine endorsement. For the first time in years, I learned predictable happiness again. The grocery list with 2 handwriting styles, the classical radio in the kitchen on low while we cooked, her lipstick marks on the wine glass like a small red calendar. It felt like rescue, because I wanted rescue. It felt like destiny because I needed a story big enough to climb into. She also brought competence, or that's what I called it, when she organized the pantry and found the box of cable bills I kept meaning to shred. She said, "You're carrying too much, not just in your shoulders, in your browser, in your wallet, in your worry. Let me help." I said, "I've always managed my money." She said, "Managing isn't the same as resting. What's the point of working a lifetime if every login puts a knot in your chest?" She was careful. She never asked for a card outright. It was little things. "I noticed you paid the power bill twice last month. Let me set it to autopay so it can't sneak up on you. Your credit union app logs you out every 5 minutes. That's ridiculous. We should consolidate. Your savings are in 3 different places, earning less than my coffee points. I can set up a high-yield account so the money finally feels appreciated." She made it sound like laundering stress. And if you've ever carried stress for long enough, you know how good it feels just to set it down for a minute. So I handed over tiny permissions dressed as favors. First, I let her track the budget in a spreadsheet, because my handwriting made numbers look guilty. Then I made her an authorized user for emergencies. Then we opened a joint account for household. She set up autopay on utilities and insurance and smiled each time an email confirmed a successful draft, like a nurse checking stable vitals. She knew precisely when to be affectionate, when to tease me about my receipt folding habit, when to call me old-fashioned in a voice that made old-fashioned sound like a compliment. I told myself this is what partnership looks like, not grand gestures, but small mercies. Someone else remembering the renewal dates, someone else noticing the duplicate subscriptions. She noticed other things too. My back pain on Tuesdays after mowing, the way I read the same paragraph twice when I'm anxious, The way I never buy myself new socks until the old ones give up. She bought me socks, and I almost cried, which made her laugh and kiss my forehead and say, "See, letting someone take care of you doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The first odd thing didn't look odd in the moment. I got a push notification that my account password had been changed for security reasons. She was in the kitchen with her laptop open and said, "Oh, that was me. Your bank forced an update. Their app is a disaster. I used your usual base phrase and added a symbol. I'll text it to you." I said thanks and meant it, because the password rules at that bank feel like hazing. A week later, a new email arrived. "Welcome to our premium relationship banking." She clapped and said, "Perks, free checks, free wires, a dedicated banker." I said, "Wires? We never wire anything." She said, "Not now, but opportunity doesn't send to save the date. Better to be ready." She framed every change as adult homework done early, and it's hard to argue with someone who is volunteering to do homework for both of you. One evening, she came home with takeout and a story about an older neighbor who got scammed by a fake investment. She said, "Breaks my heart. People who don't have anyone watching their back. We'll never be them." I said no, because I believed the we. A month later, she mentioned her mother had a medical bill a charity clinic wouldn't cover. Nothing huge, just the kind of tiny hole that sinks a small boat. She said, "I hate asking. I can figure it out. I just wanted to tell you why I'm distracted." I said, "No, tell me the number. We're a team." She resisted just long enough to make my offer feel like a win. Then she said thank you like a person being handed a warm coat. I moved a modest amount. It felt good, like proof that I was the kind of man I'd promised to be, the man who steadies the room. Money can be love when you don't know how to say the other parts out loud. After that, I stopped thinking of numbers as mine and hers and started thinking of them as ours, which is beautiful, until ours becomes hers. The autopays grew like ivy, clean, quiet, persistent. I told her I worried about debt. She said, "Debt hates sunlight, let me inventory." She found a tiny store card balance I'd forgotten and set it to 0. She found a duplicate streaming subscription and canceled one. Each victory was a marble and a jar labeled trust, and I watched the jar fill. She began smoothing me away from paper. She said, "Paper invites thieves. Let me set you to digital so nothing can be pulled from your mailbox." I said, "Fine." And she clicked boxes and the house got a little quieter because statements stopped arriving like monthly anxieties. We used to sit on Sunday afternoons and go through envelopes. Now we watched a travel show and pretended the world was closer. Sometimes her phone buzzed at midnight and she'd smile and say, "It's a friend in a different time zone." Sometimes she'd say her cousin was asking for a flight deal. Sometimes she said nothing and tucked the phone face down under her thigh like a shy bird. I noticed. Then I reminded myself that noticing is not the same as being suspicious, that old men on the internet warn you about everything because warning is how they feel important. I didn't want to be an old man who warned. I wanted to be a man who trusted, and she rewarded trust with weekends that felt like someone had folded the week into a boat and let it float away. We went to estate sales and giggled over things we didn't need. We made pasta and ruined it and ordered pizza and called that romance. We took photos I didn't post because happiness can be bigger when it's quiet. She knew the clicks at my credit union by name after 2 months. She'd bring the muffins from the bakery and call everyone by their first name. "Your lady is a ray of sunshine," one clerk told me in a whisper while stamping a cashier's check. I nodded and felt lucky the way teenagers feel lucky when the good seat on the bus is empty. The first larger transfer came wrapped in a story that fit her other stories. She had a friend, a financial advisor who specialized in late starters. People like me who had savings scattered like spare screws and no plan that made sense on paper. He could move a portion into a safer vehicle with a better yield, a ladder of CDs and a municipal bond. "Boring on purpose," she said, "so you can breathe." We met the friend. He looked like a dentist. His suit was polite. His handshake was dry. He spoke in sentences that were shorter than the slides he didn't show. I liked him in the way you like a pharmacist, as an emblem of competence more than a person. I moved a test amount, watched it settle, watched the confirmation arrive with all the correct spelling, no alarms rang, no wolves howled. The world kept behaving like a room where adults knew what they were doing. And inside that room, I started letting go of things I used to grip with my teeth. She took over the property tax schedule. She negotiated the cable down $20. She got the homeowner's insurance to reissue a policy with a lower premium and a higher smile from me. Every task checked off was another reason to say yes the next time she asked for a password or a signature. And whenever hesitation showed its head, she kissed me on the temple and said, "You lived so long on alert, you forgot what safe feels like. This is safe. Let it be safe." I wanted to let it be. I wanted to be the man who didn't jump at shadows in his own hallway. I wanted to live in the picture she kept holding up, the one where we are in our early 60s on a porch with lemon water, the dog at our feet, the mailbox empty because everything important has already found us. The night she suggested adding her as beneficiary on a couple of accounts, just in case, I didn't hear a trap. I heard the clicking of grown-up. She said if something happens, banks are horrible to grieving partners unless the paperwork is tidy. I don't want to stand there crying and fail a quiz about your middle school. I laughed, then signed, and told myself estate planning is love for the person who survives you. When the bank asked for two-factor authentication, you never notice how fragile your balance is until someone else is carrying it for you and then suddenly sets it down, just out of reach. The first real tremor came not as a storm, but as a shrug. A Tuesday afternoon when my card declined again, not at a hardware store this time, but at the pharmacy. The clerk looked at me the way clerks do when they think you've miscalculated your own wallet. I smiled like a man pretending to have simply grabbed the wrong card. I walked out without the medication I came for. And at home, she was stirring soup and humming. She said, "Oh, it's my fault again. I adjusted the limits to keep our budget lean. I'll fix it." She kissed my cheek and promised the card would work by morning. And in the morning, it did, so the moment filed itself under harmless. But harmless moments stacked into a tower that leaned when you pressed it. She began talking about opportunities as if opportunities were weather patterns. She said, "You don't want to miss a window when interest rates are shifting. You don't want to be stuck when markets change their mind." And she'd laugh at my expression like I was a farmer refusing to check the sky. She said, "Trust me, this is boring grown-up work. I'm just moving the puzzle pieces so you don't have to worry." And each time she said puzzle, I thought of my late wife who loved jigsaws and how we used to leave them unfinished on the table for weeks, safe in the knowledge no one would disturb them. Now the puzzle pieces moved without my hand, and I told myself that was what modern love looked like: collaborative, efficient, generous. I did not see that generosity can be camouflage. She started traveling small distances without telling me. A friend in another town needed help moving, a seminar for work, an errand that ran too long. She'd return with a story so textured I could almost smell it: the hotel lobby perfume, the late-night diner fries, the small-town antique shop where she bought a scarf. Each detail wrapped the absences in silk, and I let myself believe silk could hold weight. But then I noticed the joint account statement that no longer arrived in my inbox. I assumed I'd misfiled the emails. She said, "No, I streamlined. Everything's in the app." And when I asked to see, she smiled and slid the phone toward me, but the page wouldn't load. "Network issue," she said, "always when you need it least." I let it go because letting go had become easier than tugging. At night, she curled against me and whispered, "We're building something beautiful. Don't ruin it by poking holes." And who wants to be the man who ruins beauty by asking too many questions? One evening, she came home in a new dress, not expensive looking, but not from the stores we usually visited. She twirled once and said, "Do I look like someone who belongs in Paris?" I said, "You look like someone who belongs in my kitchen." She laughed and kissed me, and the moment turned the suspicion into sugar. I convinced myself again that trust was the adult currency. Then came the Friday call, a polite voice from the bank asking to confirm a wire transfer of $25,000. My heart did the old elevator drop. I said, "I don't recall authorizing that." The voice said it was initiated from our online portal, from a recognized device. My throat filled with cotton. I said, "Hold, please." I called her. She answered on the second ring, her tone brisk. I explained, and she said, "Oh my God, I meant to tell you. That's the investment ladder we discussed. Remember the friend with the bond plan? This is part of that. I should have warned you. I'm sorry. I'll handle it." And she handled it. The wire confirmed, the account adjusted, and the bank clerk said, "Congratulations," like I had achieved something deliberate. But inside, I felt the marble jar of trust wobble. I wanted to say, "Stop, pause, let's return to paper, to envelopes on Sunday, to small numbers I can see." But then she set the table with candles that night, cooked the stew my mother once taught me, and whispered, "You're safe with me." And the words "safe with me" felt like medicine, the kind you don't check the ingredients on because you're too tired. Over the next weeks, I began noticing things missing. Not objects, but absences shaped like objects. A bottle of scotch I'd been saving for my brother's birthday, gone. She said she gifted it to a coworker as thanks. A set of old coins my father gave me, vanished from the drawer. She said she'd taken them to be appraised so we'd know their value. My checkbook, which I rarely used but always kept in the desk, replaced with a fresh one. She said the bank updated the design, cleaner, more secure. I didn't want to believe theft could happen in slow motion. I didn't want to believe affection could be a mask. When my daughter asked again about the accounts, I waved her off. I said she worries too much. But my daughter's eyes told me she saw something I refused to name. The storm broke, not with thunder but with silence. She left one morning saying she had errands. Her phone went straight to voicemail by evening. By midnight, I was pacing the hall, the dog restless. I checked the closet, half her clothes gone, the dresser half empty, the bathroom counter half bare, the joint account empty, not reduced, not adjusted, but zero. I opened every app, every email, nothing. I opened the pantry and stared at the soup cans lined in rows she had organized. And I realized the order had been camouflage. I realized I had been erased from my own accounts with the same efficiency she once praised. I sat at the table with the candle stubs from last week still in their holders. My hand shook so badly I could not write. The dog laid its head on my knee and looked up like asking if I would finally admit it. I dialed the bank. The voice on the other end said, "I'm sorry, sir. The transfers were authorized. The paperwork is in order." I said, "Whose order?" They said, "Yours and hers, joint account holder, beneficiary, consolidation signatory." The words blurred into one verdict. She had taken not just money, but the illusion that I had been guarding it. She had taken the story I told myself about being safe and late love, and she left me with echoes, the walls repeating her laugh, the bed remembering her weight, the kitchen holding the ghost of her perfume. I wanted to rage, to break, to accuse, but mostly I felt old, not in years but in foolishness. Old in the way a child feels old the day they realize Santa is a performance. Old in the way a man feels when his own hand betrays him by trembling. I went to the backyard, to the tomato bed that I had once tried to tame. Weeds had crept back. The plants tangled. I crouched and tried to clear one vine, but my hands shook, and I laughed once, a dry sound, because even the garden knew how to reclaim itself after neglect. Inside the house, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "I'm so sorry." And no reply when I answered, no voice when I called, only the echo of what had already been decided. I kept telling myself that truth is supposed to set you free, but freedom doesn't always come dressed as relief. Sometimes it arrives like a stranger pounding at your door in the middle of the night, unwelcome, loud, impossible to ignore. The morning after the confrontation, I woke up in my own bed, though it didn't feel like mine anymore. The sheets smelled faintly of her perfume, the one I used to adore, the one I used to press my face into on lazy Sundays. Now, that scent clung to me like evidence, a reminder that the bed was no longer sacred ground, but a crime scene of broken vows. I tried coffee, but it tasted bitter even before I added sugar. The kitchen seemed foreign, the mug too heavy, the light too sharp. I stared at my phone, at the endless stream of unread notifications, but what I really waited for was her message, the inevitable flood of apologies, excuses, half-truths. None came. She had gone silent, and the silence was louder than anything she could have said. When I finally dragged myself outside, the world kept moving as if nothing had happened. The mailman waved, kids biked down the street, neighbors trimmed hedges. Normal life had the audacity to continue while mine had been carved in half. I drove to work, though I couldn't tell you why. My hands were on the wheel, but my mind replayed the image of her and him together like a cursed reel, looping endlessly, cutting me open every time. At the office, I must have looked like a ghost. People asked if I was sick, if I was tired, if I needed help. I nodded, lied, shrugged. What could I say? Yeah, I just caught my wife and my best friend betraying me in the most intimate way possible. Thanks for asking. No. The words didn't fit in polite conversation, so I buried them. I buried myself, but burying doesn't work for long. That evening, when the sky turned red and the shadows stretched long, I felt the walls closing in. I couldn't breathe in the house, couldn't stand the silence, couldn't bear the echo of laughter that no longer belonged to me. So I drove again, without a destination, without a plan. My car carried me to the edge of the city, to the lake where we once picnicked, where we once carved our initials into damp wood. The bench was still there, weather-beaten, scarred, but standing.
I sat down tracing the lines of that old carving, wondering how something so fragile could last longer than love. That's when the rage came back, sharp and clear. I thought about him, my best friend, or at least the man I once introduced that way. We shared secrets since we were teenagers, bailed each other out of trouble, toasted each other's victories. I trusted him like blood, and now he had taken the one person who was supposed to be untouchable. The betrayal cut twice, because it wasn't just her choice, it was his too. 2 knives instead of 1, 2 hands shoving me into the dark. I wanted revenge. Let me be honest here, because anything less will be cowardice. I wanted them to hurt. I wanted them to taste humiliation, to choke on guilt, to wake up every day knowing they had destroyed me. But then the other part of me whispered, if you sink into revenge, don't expect to rise again. I argued with myself like a madman, pacing the gravel shore, fists clenched, eyes burning. When I finally returned home, the house looked emptier than ever. She still hadn't come back. A part of me was relieved. Her absence meant I didn't have to face the tidal wave of her explanations. Another part of me hated the emptiness, hated the way the clock ticked without witness, hated how loneliness dripped into every corner like a slow leak. I grabbed a notebook, one I had never used, and started writing. Not poetry, not plans, just words. Angry words, sad words, words I couldn't say aloud. It felt like putting bandages on a wound that wouldn't close. The following days bled together. She texted once, a short line, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for hours before replying, "Not yet." I didn't know if not yet meant never or if I was just stalling. Maybe I wanted her to suffer in the silence the way I did. Maybe I wanted her to think I was strong enough to walk away. But the truth was uglier. I was afraid of hearing her voice, afraid that one syllable could pull me back into the orbit I needed to escape. Then came the call. Not from her, not from him, but from his girlfriend. Yes, the best friend who had betrayed me had a girlfriend of his own. One I had met at dinners, one who had laughed with us, toasted with us, built memories alongside us. She called, her voice trembling, and said, I know what they did." He confessed. Her words cracked, but in them I heard both devastation and solidarity. She too was standing in the rubble of betrayal. We talked for hours, complete strangers bound by the same wound, comparing timelines, piecing together the puzzle of their lives. Every revelation was another stab, but it also gave clarity. We weren't crazy. We weren't paranoid. We had been deceived, skillfully, repeatedly, but now the mask was off. In those conversations, I found something unexpected. Strength. Maybe not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never, but strength. Knowing someone else saw the truth too, knowing someone else's world had been shaken by the same earthquake, it made me feel less alone. We promised to keep in touch, to support each other, not as rebound partners, not as co-conspirators, but as witnesses who could remind each other it wasn't our fault. Still nights were the hardest. Alone in bed, every creak sounded like betrayal echoing back. Every shadow stretched too long. I stared at the ceiling until morning bled through the blinds. I wondered if healing meant I forget or if healing meant remembering without bleeding. I wasn't sure which was worse. But I do know this. That week taught me something. Pain can hollow you out. But in that hollow space, something new can be planted. Not yet grown, not yet visible, but waiting. A seed. And maybe, just maybe, if I nurture it with honesty, with strength, with the stubborn will to survive, something better can grow.
The days stretched like old elastic, worn and fraying, holding nothing firmly. I tried to tell myself that I was moving forward, but it felt more like drifting, an aimless float on a river whose current I didn't choose. Work became mechanical. Answer emails, attend meetings, nod at colleagues who pretended not to notice the shadows under my eyes. They offered polite small talk, weather, sports, anything but the storm behind my ribs. At night, though, there was no avoiding it. The house groaned with absence. Every room whispered her name. The kitchen, where she used to hum while chopping vegetables. The couch, with its cushion dented from her favorite spot. The closet, with her clothes still hanging. Traitorous reminders of a life that had looked permanent until it cracked in two. She finally came by one evening. I heard the key before I saw her face, and for a moment I thought of bolting the door, pretending not to exist. But I stayed. She walked in softly, like a trespasser in her own life. She wore no makeup, her hair tied back in a loose knot, and for the first time in years, she looked small, uncertain. She said my name as if it might shatter on her tongue. "I just want to talk," she whispered. I let her sit, but I didn't sit beside her. The space between us was its own continent, and neither of us knew how to build a bridge. She started with the usual words, "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I was confused." The words fell flat, empty currency I didn't trust anymore. I wanted to scream, "Confused? You weren't confused when you hid your phone, when you lied about meetings, when you came home with someone else's perfume on your skin." But instead, I stayed quiet. She cried then, quietly at first, then with the kind of sobs that shake the whole body. Once I would have reached for her, would have pulled her against my chest, would have promised her safety. Now I only watched, my hands heavy in my lap. When the storm passed, she said, "I ended it." I almost laughed. Ended it? As if betrayal was something you could switch off like a lamp. She insisted. "I cut him out, deleted his number, blocked him everywhere. It's over." But the thing about endings is that they don't erase beginnings. The memory remained, stubborn and sharp. She asked for another chance. Not with demands, not with begging, but with a quiet plea. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking if you can even imagine forgiving me." I didn't answer that night. Couldn't. The silence grew so heavy it pressed on our skin. Eventually she left, leaving her apology hanging like smoke in the air. Later I wrote in the notebook again. This time the words weren't just rage, they were questions. Could trust ever be rebuilt once shattered? Could love survive the weight of betrayal? Or was forgiveness just another form of denial? I filled page after page, but no answer revealed itself. And then, almost like fate's cruel trick, my phone buzzed. It was him, my former best friend. The name I used to associate with loyalty now burned my eyes. The message was short. "I'm sorry too. Can we meet?" For a moment I considered deleting it, pretending I never saw it. But curiosity, no, hunger, gnawed at me. I needed answers. I needed to look him in the eye and ask him how he could betray the very person who would have taken a bullet for him. So I agreed. We met at a dive bar on the edge of town, a place where no one knew us. He was already there, hunched over a beer, eyes red-shot. He looked older, weaker, smaller than I remembered. The years of friendship replayed in my head, the laughter, the road trips, the late-night confessions, and then they collided with the image of him and her together, and my fists clenched under the table. He started talking before I could say anything. "I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I needed to say it. I messed up. I lost control." She was vulnerable. I was stupid. I thought it meant something, but it didn't. It was a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life. I wanted to hit him. God, I wanted to slam my fist into his jaw until my knuckles bled. But violence wouldn't heal me. It wouldn't erase the nights they stole, the trust they buried. So I asked instead, why? Out of everyone in the world, why her? He looked down, ashamed. Because she was close. Because she understood me. Because I was selfish. And because I thought you'd never find out. That last line nearly broke me. The arrogance of it. The cowardice. He gambled with my life, with my marriage, assuming I'd remain blind forever. My voice shook when I said, "You were my brother. I trusted you more than anyone. And you didn't just take her, you killed us. Both of us." He nodded, tears streaking his face. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself. But I needed you to know that it's over. I cut it off, too. I regret it every day."
I left before he could say more. His regret meant nothing. His apology was ash in my mouth. As I drove home, the rage boiled again, but under it was something more dangerous. Emptiness. The kind of emptiness that can swallow a man whole. That night I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the notebook. My hands hovered over the page, but I couldn't write. The words had abandoned me. The only thing left was a dull ache, like a wound that refused to close. And yet, beneath all that pain, a strange clarity emerged. I realized I stood at a crossroads. I could drown in bitterness, let revenge rot me from the inside, or I could claw my way towards something else, healing, freedom, maybe even a future where their betrayal no longer defined me. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be quick, but for the first time since it all began, I understood that survival was not just possible, it was necessary.
The next morning started gray, the kind of sky that can't decide whether to rain or clear. I stood at the window, with coffee cooling in my hands, watching people walk their dogs, children riding bikes, lives moving forward as if betrayal were just a story in someone else's house. I envied them, their ordinariness, their unbroken routines. I hadn't spoken to her since that night. Her absence wasn't quiet, it was loud, echoing in every object she left behind. The mug with the chipped handle she always claimed, the blanket that still smelled faintly of her shampoo. They weren't just things anymore. They were evidence. Proof of a life that had existed and been broken open like a dropped glass. My phone buzzed again, this time with her name. I stared at it, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. But some masochistic part of me swiped it open. Her message was short. Please, can we meet? Not to argue, just to talk. Please. I should have ignored it. Every rational fiber in me screamed to delete it, block her, never look back. But curiosity, weakness, habit, they won. I typed back one word, win. We agreed on Saturday, the park near the river, neutral ground. The same park where, years ago, I had knelt with a trembling ring box, where she had cried and said yes before throwing her arms around me. Life is cruelly poetic sometimes. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting on a bench under the oldest oak tree. Her hands were clasped, her shoulders tight. She looked up when she saw me, eyes red but steady. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us had its own vocabulary now. Finally, she said, I don't know how to start without sounding like a coward. I sat, leaving space between us. Start anyway. She took a breath. I've been in therapy, every day since that night. I needed to understand why I did what I did, and the truth is ugly. I was selfish, lonely, and weak. I convinced myself you didn't see me anymore, that we had become routine, that I was invisible, and instead of talking to you, instead of asking for help, I went looking somewhere else, somewhere dangerous. Her words sliced through me. I wanted to shout that I had seen her, that I had noticed her exhaustion, her stress, her little sighs at night when she thought I was asleep. But seeing isn't the same as saving. And maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't been enough. She continued, her voice trembling. I've edited it. You need to know that. It wasn't love. It wasn't real. It was a mistake, and I destroyed everything for it. And now, all I can do is ask, is there anything left of us to salvage? I stared at her. Part of me wanted to believe, to grab on to her words like a rope thrown to a drowning man. But another part of me screamed, don't you dare forget. Don't you dare forgive so easily. I told her the truth. I don't know. Her eyes closed, as if the words were both expected and unbearable. Then give me a chance to prove it. 30 days, just 30. No guarantees, no promises. We rebuild, brick by brick, and if by the end you still want to walk away, I won't stop you. I almost laughed. A trial period for a marriage? But something about her desperation, her willingness to put rules around our chaos, made me pause. Maybe it wasn't about her at all. Maybe it was about me, about giving myself the chance to know I had tried. 30 days, I repeated, testing the words on my tongue. She agreed. 30 days.
That night, I opened the notebook again. I wrote the rules in big letters. No lies. No secrets. Speak before silence poisons it. Small steps only. 30 days. No guarantees. And for the first time since the betrayal, the page didn't look like a tombstone. It looked like scaffolding. Fragile, temporary, but something to hold on to. The first week was awkward, brittle. We met for dinners, but conversations stayed shallow. She talked about work, about her mother's health, about books she was reading. I responded with guarded politeness. It felt like being on a first date with someone I already knew too well, a stranger wearing the skin of my wife. One evening she came over to cook. It was clumsy, like two left-handed dancers. She reached for the salt. I flinched when her hand brushed mine. She laughed nervously, and the sound was foreign, too careful, too edited. But when she hummed while stirring the sauce, a crack opened in the wall around my chest. I remembered nights when that hum filled the whole kitchen, when I would join in off-key just to make her roll her eyes and smile. Later, she showed me her notebook. Yes, she had one too now. Pages filled with confessions, regrets, hopes. She slid it across the table and said, "Read if you want, or not. But I need you to know that I'm not hiding anymore." I didn't read it that night. Couldn't. But I kept it, tucked beside mine, two battered books holding the weight of our marriage between them. The second week was harder. Old habits clawed their way back. She was late once, just 20 minutes, but my chest tightened like a vice. The lies of the past whispered, "She's with him again. You're a fool." When she arrived, flushed and apologetic, explaining traffic, I almost accused her. The words balanced on my tongue like knives. But then I remembered the rules. Speak before silence poisons it. So I said, "I need to hear the truth because my head is inventing stories." Her eyes widened. "Traffic, nothing else, I swear." I wanted to believe her, so I did. Not because I was sure, but because not believing was a poison I couldn't drink every day. By week 3, the cracks were visible, but so were the stitches. We walked together in the evenings, talked about small things, movies, recipes, neighbors. Sometimes she reached for my hand, sometimes I let her. Each time felt like touching a wound to see if it still hurt. And then came the test neither of us expected. One night, she looked at me across the table, her eyes unblinking, and said, "There's one more thing you should know." My heart stuttered. "What?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I think I might be pregnant." The room froze. My fork slipped from my hand. Every muscle in me screamed. Pregnant? The word cracked open a dozen questions, a dozen fears. Was it mine? Could it be his? Did I even want to know? I stared at her, and she stared back, terrified. The notebook rules meant nothing in that moment. The world had just tilted on its axis.
I did not know a single word could feel like a landslide until she said pregnant. It fell into the room without permission, and everything slid with it. The plates, the chairs, the few rebuilt sentences we had managed to stand upright. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear the clock tick like a metronome for panic. I could hear the dog snore in the other room. I could hear my own breath doing the old bad trick of forgetting how to behave. She said it softly again, as if the second time would make it smaller. "I think I might be late. I have not taken a test. I did not want to bring you a fact wrapped in a guess, but I had to bring you the guess because the silence was eating me alive." I stared at the spot on the table where her fork had fallen, and I thought about the word father, how it has weight and warmth and work inside it, how it can be a prayer or a threat depending on where it lands. I thought about calendars and clocks, and those weeks when my house was a hallway of excuses and low voices and tilted phones, and I felt the floor lean again. She reached for my hand and stopped halfway, as if touching me would set off an alarm. She said, "I know what you were thinking. I am thinking it too. And I hate that I made a life where that thought even has a place to sit. I hate that I made you doubt your own home. I wanted to be cruel then. I wanted to throw back every late night and every careful lie and make them stand in a line and count off. But the anger came out sideways, as quiet, I said, we are not guessing. Not tonight, not tomorrow. We are going to get answers, not stories. You will take a test in the morning, and then you will call your doctor, and then we will go together or apart, but we will not let imagination run this house. She nodded like a defendant accepting terms. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and said, I am scared. I said, me too, but fear is not a compass. We have said this before. And then I surprised myself by getting up and rinsing the plates as if ordinary motion could buy us a few sane minutes. The night was a long hallway with the lights out. She slept on the couch because the 30-day truce had boundaries and because the bed felt like a courtroom. I lay down and watched the dark make its slow maps on the ceiling. At 5, I was up making coffee we did not drink. The store opened at 6. I drove there without music. I bought 2 boxes because I did not want to argue with probability. When I came back, she was sitting up with her knees under her chin. She took the bag like a person receiving mail from another country. She stood, she disappeared down the hall. The minutes set up camp in my chest and refused to move. When she returned, her face was more complicated than good news or bad news. She sat and said, they confirmed what the stick said. Early. Too early for the other answer. The doctor will run blood work. We will do dates and numbers and those careful little charts. She said a sentence about non-invasive options later if we need them, and I nodded like a man nods of a language he once knew. On the drive home, she said, I do not want to build a house out of guesses. I want to build a plan out of facts. I said, good, but my voice sounded like someone else borrowed it. That afternoon, I opened the notebook and wrote a single line in a handwriting that looked steadier than I felt. We will not let dread write this chapter. Then I put the notebook away because some days the bravest thing is to leave the page empty. We began living in short units of time, morning to afternoon, afternoon to evening. I cooked simple things because complicated things mocked me. She ate even when she didn't want to, because she is braver than she thinks. We walked the long loop in the neighborhood at dusk because motion is the opposite of doom. We did not hold hands, but we did not walk far apart. On the 3rd day, her mother called, and I watched her choose honesty. I heard her say, I made a mess and I am trying to clean it with both hands. Her mother must have said something useful because when she hung up, her mouth had the shape of someone who had been reminded of the person she could still be. The blood work came back with numbers, and those numbers had the arrogance of being inconclusive. The doctor talked about the way weeks are counted, about this window versus that window, about how certainty is a staircase, not an elevator. Come back next week. Bring your questions. Bring your fear. The nurse said it kinder than that. We went home with a folder that made us look like people. We were still a little bit people. That night she stood in the doorway of the spare room where her boxes had begun to regroup. She said, do you hate me? I said, I hate what you did to both of us. I hate that I can hear my own doubt walking around the house. I hate that your mistakes are so loud inside my head that I cannot hear the better facts. But I do not know how to hate you about setting myself on fire. She nodded like someone who accepts a sentence because it is honest. We sat at the kitchen table and made a list like accountants of hope. Call counselor, schedule joint session, write down questions for doctor without flinching, make an appointment with the bank's fraud department even if it is late and even if our chances are thin. Tell my daughter before she learns from the wind. Sleep if possible. Forgive nothing yet. Refuse to rehearse catastrophe. Keep food in the fridge even when nerves steal appetite. Water the plant on the sill because green things are a vote. The next morning, I called my daughter and heard the weather change in her voice when I said we needed to talk. She came by that evening. She hugged me first, then hugged the dog, then sat and looked at my wife and said, okay, say the hard thing. My wife did not bargain or edit. She said, I might be pregnant and the calendar is unkind. My daughter did the math on her face and then did something rare and beautiful. She did not choose a side. She chose the work. She said, here's what we will do. Dad, you will not drink the whole bottle like a cartoon. You will not look at the walls like they owe you an answer. You will breathe and you will eat and you will show up. And you, she turned to my wife, you will tell the truth even when it's ugly. You will call me when your brain tries to tell you quitting is a shortcut to virtue. You will treat this house like an ICU for trust and you will wash your hands before you touch anything. We laughed a little because the metaphor was bossy and perfect. And then we cried because crying is sometimes the only proof a heart is still plugged in. The next week had its own dull music. Work,
walks, lists. The old friend who texted again and I didn't answer. The counselor who had room on Friday and saw us both. He asked us to say out loud the sentences we had been saying silently. I said, I am terrified of being made a fool twice. I said, I cannot build a future on a maybe I did not choose. She said, I am terrified that my worst self wrote checks my best self cannot cash. She said, I want to be the person who walks toward the fire and not the one who blames the flames for being hot. The counselor gave us homework that sounded like chores, small daily declarations. I will be here at 6 and then be here at 6. I will answer the hard question before the easy one. I will narrate my fear before my fear narrates me. I will not weaponize silence. I will not give quizzes. The next appointment at the clinic sat on the calendar like a thunderhead. On the morning of it, the dog threw up grass on the rug because the world loves adding tiny indignities to large trials. We cleaned it together without commentary. Then we drove. The parking lot was full of people carrying their own mysteries in folders and tote bags. The sonographer was kind and brisk, like someone who can fold a parachute while making tea. She dimmed the lights and told us where to look. She spoke in careful phrases that respected both the science and our shaking. Afterward, we sat in that little room with the poster about folate and the second hand moving. The doctor came in with the slow walk of a person who understands what power words have. She explained what she could not yet. She gave us a tighter window and a plan. Another round, another date. The staircase, not the elevator. We drove home and did not turn on the radio again, because rhythms felt disrespectful. At a red light, my wife said, if this child is yours, I will spend the rest of my life proving I deserve the luck of that sentence. If this child is not yours, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are not drafted into a war you didn't start. I said, I do not know what I will do with either answer, but I know I will not let this house teach me cruelty. I know I will not let my daughter learn revenge from me. I know I am tired of learning the hard way. That night I watered the small plant and found 2 new leaves like tiny open hands. I told it the truth, because plants are terrible gossips and wonderful priests. I told it I am afraid, and I am trying. I told it I want to be a man my future self does not have to apologize for. We ate in the quiet and cleaned the dishes and left the phones on the counter like sleeping birds. And when sleep finally came, it did not feel like mercy, it felt like a loan, due back in the morning with interest. The next day at work, I signed a form without reading and then caught myself and laughed because vigilance returns in strange places. I reprinted the form and read every line like it was a map out of a forest. At lunch, I sat in my car and listened to the wind make small choices in the trees. I decided the 30 days would not be 30 performances. They would be 30 ordinary days done honestly. If they add up to something, good. If they don't, good too. Because then we will have the decency of certainty. That evening, my daughter texted a picture of a casserole and the caption, "You two are not allowed to live on toast." I sent back a picture of the plant like a report card. She replied with a green heart and the words, "Still here." And sometimes "still here" is the bravest sentence a family can say. The calendar moved its finger to the next square. The next appointment waited. And somewhere under all the fear, a sentence began to form that I did not yet know how to end. If the worst thing happens, we will not let it teach us the worst parts of ourselves. If the best thing happens, we will not pretend it was easy. If the true thing happens, we will stand still long enough to hear it when it arrives. And while we waited, we did the only work that seemed honest. We kept breathing, we kept showing up, we kept not guessing out loud.
I thought the hardest part had already happened, that the storm had already hit, and now all that was left was to pick up the pieces scattered across the floor. But life doesn't tie itself into neat chapters. It keeps spilling, keeps bleeding, keeps asking if you're ready for the next wave before you've even found your footing from the last one. The morning after the hospital visit, the house was too quiet. Even the ticking of the clock felt like a judgment, each second insisting I face what was ahead. She was still asleep, her breathing shallow, her face half buried in the pillow like a child trying to hide from a nightmare. I wanted to believe it was a peaceful sleep, but I knew better. Guilt has a way of curling around you, even in dreams. I went to the kitchen, poured coffee into a cup that suddenly felt too heavy, and stared at the seedling on the windowsill. The green blade had grown taller, stubborn, and fragile all at once. I thought about how it didn't ask permission to push through the soil, didn't wait until the conditions were perfect. It simply rose because that's what life does. Maybe that was the point. We didn't need perfect conditions, just the decision to keep rising. Later, when she finally woke, she found me by the window. She didn't say, "Good morning." Instead, she whispered, "Do you hate me today?" The question cut deeper than any admission she had made before. It wasn't about yesterday or last week. It was about the daily gamble of staying, of choosing each other again and again despite the cracks. "I don't hate you," I said, and the truth of it startled me. But I don't know how to forget either. She nodded. Tears she didn't bother to hide this time spilling freely. She said, "Then don't forget. Just don't let it be the only thing you remember." We moved through the days slowly, like people relearning how to walk after an accident. Every gesture carried weight. Passing the salt, folding the laundry, brushing against each other in the hallway. Each moment was a small decision, retreat or reach out. And though not every reach landed, the fact that we kept trying felt like its own kind of faith. The evenings became our testing ground. We'd sit on the couch without turning on the TV, letting the silence stretch, waiting to see who would break it first. Sometimes it was her, asking about my day in the smallest, most careful voice. Sometimes it was me, telling a story about the neighbor's dog or the old man at the store who insisted coins still mattered. These weren't grand conversations, but they were bridges built plank by plank. A week later, the results came back with final clarity. She wasn't pregnant. Relief and disappointment braided themselves into a rope neither of us wanted to pull. She cried harder than I expected, not because she wanted a child now, but because the possibility had been a mirror, forcing her to see all the ways she had complicated her life. She admitted, through sobs, "I wanted it to mean something better than the mess I made." I held her then, not as a man forgiving a betrayal, not as a husband reclaiming his wife, but simply as a person holding another who had run out of strength. I told her, "It means we get to choose, not fate, not mistakes, us." Healing didn't come with fireworks. It came in fragments, her phone left openly on the counter, me not checking it anyway, dinners eaten at the table instead of over the sink, laughter that arrived hesitant but real, like a bird testing its wings. We were building something again, not from scratch because the past was still there, but with new tools, sharper honesty, smaller lies. Yet the question lingered in every room. Was rebuilding strength, or was it denial dressed in routine? Were we mending the house, or just repainting cracked walls? The truth is, I don't know. Maybe love isn't about knowing. It's about showing up even when the map is blurred and the compass spins. Weeks later, we walked again to the lake, past the bait shop with the peeling pelican and the eternal open sign. The air smelled like rain waiting for permission. She reached for my hand, and this time I didn't hesitate. Her grip was firm, not desperate. She said, "I don't know if we'll make it." I answered, "Neither do I, but today we're here. And that has to be enough." We stood by the blue bench with its rude instruction carved deep. "Be kind, you cowards." She ran her fingers across the words like she always did, but this time she smiled. She said, "Maybe this is our only real rule." I nodded. Maybe kindness was the only compass we had left. As the gulls circled overhead and the water slapped against the shore, I realized the story wasn't over. It wasn't tidy. It wasn't resolved. It was just alive. And maybe that was the bravest thing of all. If you were in my place, would you try to rebuild after betrayal? Or would you walk away and never look back? Could you forgive? Or is trust once broken gone forever? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know how you would handle it.